Last week, we talked about this idea of relating to work. And the thing that we said last week is how we relate to work is vitally important to the fulfillment we will experience in this life. How we relate to work is vitally important to the fulfillment that we will experience in this life. And we looked at the book of Genesis. We looked at the creation story where God created the heavens and the earth and everything in it, and this world was absolutely perfect. And in the beginning, when God created everything and Adam and Eve lived in this absolutely perfect world, they were placed in a garden to work. And we looked at this idea that we were created for work, and we can find fulfillment in work. Even when work is hard, we can find fulfillment in it. And I gave you guys a practical challenge last week, and I hope that you took advantage of it. We'll talk more about that here in a little bit. This week, we're going to talk about another way that we relate to work. I had a few jobs over the course of my life. I remember when I was 15 years old, I went out and got my first job. I was a lifeguard at our local pool. And when the pool shut down for the summer, I became a Pizza King employee, and I made pizzas and I ran drinks. And our Pizza King in our hometown had a train, so I often ran the train with drinks around on the train. I remember when I was in college, I was a resident assistant, which meant I was in charge of a hallway of guys in our dormitory. But by and large, the most grueling, most physically difficult job I have ever had was at a car parts factory called TOA. I worked there one summer when I was in college. My dad knew a guy that was one of the bosses there, and so he got me a job there for the summer. And so I was super excited. I worked for TOA, and I remember I was a little bit nervous, but I was also excited. I stepped into work my first day, and I put on my glasses to make sure that I was being safe, and I put on my hard hat, and I was ready to go move some car parts, right? Now, I was told ahead of time that I would be lifting and moving car parts that weighed anywhere from 30 pounds to 50 pounds. And so my job, I'm going to take these off so I can see you guys better. My station looked something like this. Each one of these car parts weighed these were the heavier ones, so around 50, 60 pounds-ish, right? And so all day long, what I would do is I had these gloves on that were like oven mitts, basically. And as the car parts would come around the conveyor, they would be black because they had just got painted. So I would unload a car part, put it on a rack. Unload a car part, put it on a rack. Unload a car part, put it on a rack. Unload a car part, put it on a rack. Then that would be one rack. There would be another rack here. I would grab a fresh car part, put it on a hook, 2, 3, 4, and the thing would keep going. And then this one behind it, I would unload. And so all day long, unload, reload, unload, reload, unload, reload, all day long. And I remember I got to lunch, right? And I had a 30-minute lunch break. And I went out to my car, and I sat there, and I thought, what am I doing? I felt like every single muscle in my body was going to fall off my bones, right? And I had only worked until lunch. And I remember walking out that first day, and I was like, I can't do this. I can't do this. Like, I'm a small guy in general. The other guy that was working there with me was a bigger guy. He'd been doing this for a while. And like he was doing it with ease. And I was like, dude, I can't do this. Like, I'm too small. I'm not tough enough. I'm not strong enough. I can't do this. And I walked out that first day from that factory, and I was ready to quit. I knew I did not want to work here for the summer. I wanted out. Paul writes a letter to the people of Colossae, and it's a letter that we call the book of Colossians. And in the book of Colossians, Paul is writing to a group of people that are constantly being told, you can't do this. This group of people is being told, you can't be Jesus followers because fill in the blank. You can't be Jesus followers because you're not Jews. You can't be Jesus followers because you aren't obeying the customs and the laws of Judaism. You can't be Jesus followers. And there was this whole list of things that people were saying to the church in Colossae. You can't do this because. And so Paul writes this letter, and the theme that he comes back to time and time and time again is this: set your minds on things above. Set your minds on things above, not on the things of this world. And he goes into this dialogue where he says, listen, set your minds on things above. People of this world may tell you you're not good enough for God's grace, but the truth is God says you're good enough for his grace, and so you're good enough for his grace. People may tell you you're not obeying, you're not doing the right things. God says grace covers sins. God says that you are chosen, you are a part of his people, you are a part of his heritage. It doesn't matter if you grew up as a Jew or not. You are a part. Let's set our minds on things above. Let's not worry about being on this earth and working for the praise of mankind. Let's believe and be a part of a God that says you're in. Now, what does any of this have to do with work? Because it sounds like set your minds on things above, and God's grace covers everything. People saying you're not good enough, but you are good enough. All of that is awesome, really important stuff to know. But what does it have to do with work? And in Colossians chapter 3, it's a really short book. So near the end of the book, it says this. He goes into this dialogue where he starts talking about the way families should behave together and the way people should work together. And he says this: whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive an inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. Whatever you do, work heartily for the Lord. You see, so often we work for man's praise. We do. All of us do it. You think about if you have a job outside of school or home, you may work really, really hard when your boss is looking, but when he's not looking, you may slack off a little bit. You may goof off a little bit. I remember at Pizza King, there were times where when my boss was looking, like I was on it, right? I was working hard. I was doing what I was supposed to. But then when my boss wasn't working, like I may take a mushroom and throw it against the top of the oven up near the ceiling so it just stuck there, right? It was dumb, right? But it was a slack off type thing and a waste of produce. And we do this in school, right? We may do some of our homework, but then we also may use some apps. We may ask some friends. We may copy some answers because we want to get good grades on our homework. We want our parents to be proud. We want our teachers to know that, we know this stuff. But we may take some shortcuts when people aren't looking. At home, we may do our chores, but if our parents came in and saw where we stuffed all the stuff in our room, they may say, you know what, that's not where that goes. And we want our parents to walk in and say, hey, this room looks great. We work for the praise of our parents, But Paul is saying, listen, there is a higher way to work. And he comes back to this theme again. So often we work for the praise of people. And we do things just so we will look good in front of other people. And so often, how we look good in front of people is less important for us than looking good for people. And Paul says, when we work, we should work to honor the God that created us to work in the first place. We shouldn't worry about what our parents think. We shouldn't worry about them walking in and seeing a clean room. We should clean up our room and put things where they go because we work for a God who sees everything. We shouldn't slack at our job or throw mushrooms against the oven so they stick there because we don't want to work just for a boss that thinks we're a good worker when he's around. We want to work for God who sees us all the time. We don't want to take shortcuts on homework. We want to work hard so that we know this stuff because we are working to honor God. We are working to honor the God that created us to work in the first place. And I know what you're thinking. CJ, you don't have any idea. You don't know my teachers. You don't know how much homework they assign. You don't know my boss. You don't know my parents or what they expect. And to some extent, yes, that is true. I don't specifically know all of the relationships that you encounter when you think about work. But I do know this. I know that Paul here says we should work heartily as for the Lord. And when you see who Paul is writing to, it changes how we think about, CJ, you don't know who I'm talking about. You don't know my teachers. You don't know my bosses. Because look at who Paul is writing here in the book of Colossians. In Colossians, just slightly before chapter 3, verse 23, starting in verse 22, it says, bondservants or slaves, obey in everything those who are your earthly masters, not in a way of eye service or as people pleasers, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. And then he says, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord, not men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive an inheritance as your reward. You are serving Christ Jesus. Now, listen to this. He's talking to slaves. Now, before we go any further, we have to be clear, this was not American slavery. Some things were similar to first century slavery and American slavery. Yes, they were both owned by their masters. But there were some also drastic differences in the slavery that occurred in the first century versus the slavery that occurred in America, in early America. In the first century, people that were slaves were often indistinguishable from people that weren't slaves. People that were slaves were educated. People that were slaves owned their own property. People that were slaves had their own cash or money at the time. People that were slaves were able to get freedom much more quickly than the people that were slaves in early American culture. As a matter of fact, in the early first century, people would sell themselves into slavery in order to find a decent working relationship. So the slavery, while being similar, was also very, very, very different. Now, did the masters own their servants? Yes. Okay? Were the Jesus followers of that time putting practices into place that would make the slavery better? Yes. Would Paul speak much more clearly against early American slavery than he does about the first century slavery? Absolutely. Here's why I bring this up, though. Because the slaves of that time, Paul says, obey in everything those who are your earthly masters. They were expected to do what their master said. Much like we are expected to do what our teachers and our bosses and our parents say. And we are not slaves to our teachers. We are not slaves to our bosses. We are not slaves to our parents. And if Paul says this to people that didn't have a choice whether to follow it or not, Paul would look at us today and he would say, listen, in your work, whether that's work at home, helping out with your family, doing your chores, whether that's work at school, making sure that you are getting educated, or whether that's work outside the home at a place of business, Paul would say, work for the Lord. Because how we work for the people of this earth is a reflection of how we work for God. How we work for the people of this earth is a reflection of how we work for God. The truth is that your parents know that you come here on Sunday nights. Your teachers know that you are a Jesus follower. Your bosses know that you come to church and you follow Jesus. And they know when we're slacking. My bosses knew when I had thrown mushrooms up against the oven because oftentimes it was the bosses that had to scrape them off the ovens, right? They know when we're slacking. And it's a reflection of how we work for God. And so we have to work hard. We have to work hard. We have to work like we're working for God, because at the end of this entire passage, in verse 24, Paul says, you are serving the Lord Christ. You are serving the Lord Christ. I walked out of TOA that day exhausted. And I went home and I remember being like, I'm quitting. I'm done. I can't do this. I can't work this job. And I'm not sure that Colossians chapter 3 specifically came to my mind, but there was something inside of me, and there were others that were encouraging me to work hard. And so the next day, I put on my hard hat and my steel toe boots, and I went and I got my fresh pair of oven mitt gloves, and I moved some car parts. And I did it the day after that, and I did it the day after that, and the day after that, and something crazy started to happen. I started finding fulfillment in this job. There was something really, really cool about this forklift, knowing that at the beginning of the day, we were going to get 36, 40, I don't remember, 50 racks of car parts, and I was going to be moving them all day long and seeing how quickly I could get these car parts moved on and off the racks, on and off the racks, on and off the racks. And it was cool to be able to work with the people that I was working with on my shift. You know, I got to know some people that were there for a shorter time than me. I got to know some people that were there for a longer time than me. And I remember this work that started out so hard was still very, very physically grueling, physically difficult. But I remember there was this idea that I was working hard and I was finding fulfillment. And the verse of Colossians rang true. I was working hard not because I wanted to impress this car parts company that I was going to be working for a few months. I was working hard because I was working for something bigger. And I got this really cool fulfillment out of it. And I remember at the end of the summer when it was time for me to go back to college, and I stepped out of that car parts factory for the very last time. Yes, I was excited to be done with the work, but there was a part of me that was going to miss it. I was going to miss this idea of moving car parts all day long. I was going to miss being able to encourage the other guys that were working with me, some guys that had some difficult lives. I was going to miss going into work every day and knowing that I was working hard and seeing physically, literally, the task that I was accomplishing day in and day out. And I found that because I was working for something greater than just myself or making other people look good. I found fulfillment. Colossians chapter 3, verse 23 says, "Whatever you do, work heartily, as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive an inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ." Tonight I have a question for you. What work for you is hard? What work for you is hard? Maybe for you it's your chores at home. Maybe you have some chores that are just grueling. Maybe for you it's the homework because you are taking some pretty high-level classes that are difficult. Or maybe there's just a class that you're just struggling with. You can't get a handle on it. And for you, homework is difficult. Maybe for you, it's this job that you have outside of work. What work for you is hard? And my question to you tonight is, how hard are you working? Are you working to impress your parents? Are you working to impress your bosses? Are you working to impress your teachers? Or are you working for something greater? Because here's the deal. When we work for the Lord and we put everything we have into it, our parents are going to be impressed. When we put everything that we have into it, our bosses are going to be impressed, and so are our teachers. So my question is, what work is hard for you? Now, last week I gave you a practical challenge that was hard. I saw it all over your faces when I gave you this challenge last week. I asked you to go to your parents and say, "Mom, Dad, I was created for work. I can find fulfillment in work. We talked about it Sunday night. Give me a job to do." And all of your eyes got about ginormous, like there is no way I am going to ask my parents to give me a job. But I hope that some of you stepped out and you took a step of faith and you said, "Okay, God, you can work through this." And if you didn't, that's okay. That's all right. But I want to encourage you, if you haven't done that and you want to take a next step in your faith, ask your parents this week. See what they say. And if you have done that or you want a different challenge, I've got a different challenge for you this week as well. If you want to take a next step. Guys, the reason I give you these challenges is because it's cool to come in here and sit and have fun and play games and win prizes and all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, when we walk out of these doors, I want you to have something concrete that you can say, "All right, if I want to take a next step in my faith, if I want to challenge myself to grow, here's something I can do." And maybe God lays something else on your heart throughout the week, and that's fine, but I would just want to give you a jump start, something that you could accomplish. And so this week's challenge is this. Whatever is difficult for you this week, I want you to go in every day and give it everything you've got. Everything you've got. Your parents say clean your room, and like that's your grueling, difficult, horrible, awful task. You go in, you clean your room, and you put everything where it goes. You get hours of homework every night this week, and you go home, and instead of going to your app and you look up on your app and you just start copying answers, you actually do all of your homework. You go in for that boss that you just can't stand, and you step into that place of work and you remind yourself, "I am working for God and I'm going to give it everything I've got this week." Because Paul is clear. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. For you are serving the Lord Christ. This week, we have an opportunity to take another step in our faith. And so I want to encourage you. I know it's difficult. I know it can be uncomfortable. I know that it's not something that is super exciting, but the cool thing is that when we do things that are difficult, things that are uncomfortable, things that aren't exciting, things that are tough, something inside of us can begin to change. And God can use those tough times, those tough things, to make us better people. And so this week, my practical challenge to you is whatever work is hard, go out this week and give it all you've got. Check this out, and then the band can come up.